Hi there, and welcome to the first in this mini-series of webinars where we're going to have a look at simple and efficient ways of improving the quality in your catalog procurements. We're going to take you right the way through from early stage requirements all the way through to implementation, especially looking more closely at service requirements and that service integration piece with cloud suppliers. It's in four parts, and apologize if it goes a bit too fast. Please feel free to give us a call and get a copy of the slides, and we can walk you through them at a better pace. But I'm going to try and keep it snappy so that you can don't get too bogged down in PowerPoint today. So this is the first, as I say, of four, and it's a game of two halves. And the first is going to be split into two, where we're going to look at procurement from the catalogue. So what we're trying to do here is look to get the best out of the cloud procurement. Cloud gives us a lot of opportunities to reduce costs, to simplify, and with the digital marketplace, we were able to hopefully greatly improve the agility and speed of get those services on board. But how do you ensure the quality in the process and that make sure that the selection, the results of your cloud service are what you want? How do you know that what you're going to get from the supplier? And often we have seen cloud descriptions not well marrying up with the services that have been provided by suppliers. I'm being polite there. And then actually, are the costs that are being quoted, are they realistic or representative of the actual final cost, not just of the catalog item? And as we know, there's the catalog gives us the ability to procure additional outcomes through severe and time materials basis, but all the hidden costs that go with evaluating and then procuring those different services, looking at how, for example, you do an apples for apples comparison where terminology might be different and references might be different, where you might be one set of quotation is in by per hour, where another one is per user, where one is looking at per month, and the other one is looking maybe by per image. So how do you evaluate those? And then once you procured them, how do you actually evaluate the cost of taking those on board? Not only the service onboarding, but then the through life costs, the obligations that are going to be passed from supplier to client, because unfortunately with cloud, there's a lot of the risk comes back to the client, and the services you're going to need to stand up. How do you evaluate those? And then finally, with the agility and ability of the cloud frameworks, there is a limitation in 2 years on those. Often these business services have to endure way beyond the timeline of any simple procurement. So making that procurement agile and repetitive so that actually you're able to procure with confidence small agile exercises that can be glued together to create an end-to-end capability that sustains. And that's again where your service design comes very important to ensure the users get what they need. So without further ado, we're going to look at the first two of those 4 points, just so we get an idea around that quality side of the procurement process. And then later on, we'll be looking a lot more around the criteria and some of the more requirement side of it. So at ViewDeck, we've working with a number of clients to look at how we can streamline the processes that are used and how we can make sure they're repeatable and are easier to act inside an organization. Streamline those processes will then ensure that you get consistency in your down selection through the clarification of the award process, and hence hopefully ensure that a greater quality in that process and the outcomes. Requirements are a very important part of that exercise, while catalog procurements, the risk and the ownership of those requirements does fall back to the client, because you are buying a catalog. If the catalog item says it's going to do X, that's fine. If it doesn't say it's going to do X, that risk falls back to you as the client. So getting a set of requirements is important because it helps with communication between the various stakeholders internally. It helps you describe the outcome you're trying to achieve. It is informative to a supplier, and it's a very good way of measuring and managing and down selecting, clarifying those services. So requirements haven't gone away. However, we're running agile processes and we're running agile procurement. So hence it's very important those requirements, first of all, are aligned correctly. They're aligned to a cloud procurement, not a traditional outsourced or packaged deployment. They are very much a cloud. You're buying a service, not a piece of technology. But equally, they're also clarify those interfaces that you need between your organization and the end and the end supplier. So again, it's as a service, not as a piece of technology, and that makes those requirements slightly different. They need to be appropriate. There's no point in having thousands of requirements that takes you months and months and months to gather, when in reality you're looking for a package selection, a service selection that can very, very quickly take you to give you some capability on board. They need to be appropriate. And then we come to this terminology of being smart. So we can look at the first two items in our first set webinars, and then we'll come back to 3 and 4 on this list in the following webinars, where we'll look a bit more about how those functional and non-functional requirements can be used to come up with key criteria, and how the templated approach can simplify and greatly improve the efficiency of that procurement. So G-Cloud gives us a simple high-level process, and this graphic's taken from the digital marketplace, and it gives you a very high-level overview of the steps that are meant to be taken to allow you with the down select. Unfortunately, of course, always the devil's in the detail, and while coming up with going through these stages looks quite straightforward, there are a few nuances and a few gotchas that need to be watched out for through that process to make sure that you have a repeatable, auditable process. Still has to be audited, that it is fair, and that you can demonstrate that, and equally you get a evaluation and an award that is the right solution you want. Unfortunately, G-Cloud is obviously a relatively new uh, process, and that has led to some particular facets that can make it a little bit difficult. So, for example, it's often we will find that suppliers will describe their services in totally different terminology. They may be describing almost the same thing, but because of the way they want to try and market it, and possibly the use cases they're trying to solve, they may describe those services in completely different terms. So the apples for apples comparison. So what you'll find is that not only is the what they're describing different, but the terminology and the words they're using. So part of this process is to try and make a level playing field, a balanced playing field that enables you to not only down select through that search and filter, clarify, but also then evaluate and award. So we've taken that high level approach and broken it down into a set of quite simple, straightforward steps that takes you through a quite simple process, easy to communicate and demonstrate. And that's part of um, the exercise that we see in clients, where this is obviously quite new for a lot of business owners. Often they will still think in old terminology and old ideas, where I come up with requirements, I throw it over the wall, some supplier will do it for me, and then I'm happy. Unfortunately, with the cloud, that process has to change to get the agility and the catalog basis. It's important that the requirements that you are looking for, if you want to go through the G-Cloud approach and avoid going through a separate OJU process, then the requirements need to be suitable and aligned, and the business needs to understand that the risk falls back to them to make sure the service fulfills what they need. What does that mean? Well, it means that you often have to be pragmatic around those requirements and how they might be interpreted. And when it comes to evaluation and down selection, often there'll be compromises. So we will look and through this process to often try and simplify and reduce the number of mandatories where possible, and challenge some of the perceptions that things have to be done. Avoid the gold plating to enable the agility and the quick selection. So our process tries to take us all the way through, and I'm just going to whiz our way through with a little pointer. So the requirements is the standard set of requirements that you would expect from in the normal business analysis process, and we'll come to how the best way of doing that and the appropriateness. From that, we will then identify a number of keywords. So typically these will be high-level indicators that are very good for doing that initial search, to getting down from, oh gosh, can be over 7,000 software as a service suppliers on there, down to a list. And typically these will be keywords around the business outcome, the functionality that we're trying to do. Um, from those keywords with the catalog, we come up with what we call the long list. And typically we will look to try and pick a set of keywords that will take us down to somewhere between a dozen, 20 or so suppliers or services provided by different suppliers that fulfill, we think, at the high level. So again, you might be looking for project management software, you might be looking for contact management software. Those sort of keywords are the things that we would look to use with that long list. We will then try and take a set of key criteria. Now, these are, you can consider these to be, if you're familiar with UML, these are business needs level. They are high level statements of outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Typically, we will look to separate some of those between functional criteria and non-functional criteria, typically 50-50, though that's down to the drive and desires of obviously of the business owners. Identify those key criteria that help us with the evaluation, and we will use those key criteria to look at the descriptions that the suppliers have provided and use those key criteria to score and mark and down select. So again, that's a filtering exercise. Typically, the detail is in those service descriptions. It's not part of the catalog. So the keywords are used to search from the catalog, and then as a sort of next level of detail, we look at the service descriptions to get down to a shorter list, possibly maybe the same, where hopefully no more than around half a dozen, where we will look at each of the key criteria and just ascertain how well the supplier's catalog item represents those criteria, those outcomes we want to achieve. As I say, they typically will be across both functional and non-functional. We will often look to try and avoid too many operational service requirements at that time, because those are often open to interpretation, but certainly the non-functional might look to achieve. From that, then we start to look at possibly engaging with the suppliers. And this is, in OG terms, is quite not too dissimilar to competitive dialogue, but it is a process where we will look to clarify the requirements, sorry, the service descriptions against our criteria. We're not in a position to throw the requirements over to the supplier saying, how much does it cost? That's as a catalog, you're not meant to be doing that. But what we can do is then walk through with suppliers, with their services, to just understand how well they fit our key criteria. Now that can be often it can be over the phone, it could be interviews, and depending on the scale or size of the procurement, it might be suitable just to do it over a telephone, or actually, if in the case of something that's probably requires a bit more engagement and a bit more confidence, then you'd look to the supplier to do a presentation. At this point, there is no reason why you cannot make available the requirements to the suppliers. Suppliers can choose whether they want to give any confidence that their service meets your requirements. But what they're not able to do is either adapt their service um, uh, or provide additional catalog items. G-Cloud enables us to fill in the gaps using effectively time and materials, additional procurement of services based on the Sphere rate card. So what we have to end up doing is take the standard standard catalogs that they're providing, identify the gaps that we think, and then through that come up with a financial model. And this is where we start to look into what are they actually offering out of the box, what is additional, what we're going to have to pay for, and what is going to be our obligations on our side, on the supplier side. That's where we have to look at the service interfaces. From that, G-Cloud gives us four means evaluated criteria, which cover functional, non-functional, um, operational and implementation, cost and implementation. And through that scoring, we then obviously do a simple evaluation exercise to enable us to come up with what we think is the best criteria, and take that to obviously the SRO for confirmation award. All during that process, each stage is audited. As it's a catalog service, and that predominantly that's an audit against the decisions that were made at the various stages along the way. And that gives you then the audit to give the confidence that actually you have made a fair and open procurement. Now, what is obviously quite important, as we discussed, is to at least give your suppliers an indication of what you're trying to achieve. In theory, the service description should be sufficient. How often, as always, these things are more complicated than a pure package, place an order on the back of a simple conversation. So having a good set of requirements that are what we call smart, that means you can evaluate them and you can measure them, and they're atomic and repeatable. I'll come to that in a bit more. That enables you to come up with not only your keywords and your key criteria, but also then to act as a communication and a dialogue between internal stakeholders and the suppliers to come up and ensure that there's a common understanding of the outcomes that want to be achieved. Very important to actually achieve that. Again, you need to make sure that those requirements are suitable and appropriate for the type of procurement that's going on. There is no value in having, as I say, thousands of requirements which have taken months and months and months, when actually you're looking for a package service that has only got a maximum life of 2 years, and probably you might have much shorter than that. So it's all about making sure that they are appropriate. Smart requirements are important, and without reading all the words on the PowerPoint slide, smart requirements is a fairly well accepted and good requirements business analysis practice, and really just make sure that each requirement should be unambiguous. It should be easily understandable without any which should, without interpretation, require any. It should be clear to anybody reading it what is the outcome it's trying to do. It should be concise, very important, and it should be atomic, which means it should stand on its own. It should describe very clearly a single outcome, and what you want to achieve. It needs to be consistent. So you shouldn't have any conflicts between any of those statements. They need to be complete. So all the things you would expect, but it's quite important, and often this is actually where we will actually spend some time trying to get a precise and concise set of requirements that can be used to come up with not only that engagement and that selection process, but also help you with your cost model and your supplier engagement. Having in G-Cloud world, the selection and requirements are typically split into 3 areas. We're not going to cover the functional side here today, because obviously that's dependent on the service that you're trying to procure, and business outcome you're trying to achieve. However, the other 2, one is service, because you are buying a service, typically software as a service, but it may be PaaS or IaaS. And you're also, sorry, and the other key one is around security, and we'll come to that in a minute. But from a service point of view, service requirements are typically described in ITIL terms, and a lot of agencies, a lot of departments have accepted an ITIL model as the ways of describing and articulating their various service processes and service interfaces. And we find that's quite useful as a framework to understand the obligations and the outcomes that suppliers and clients are trying to achieve. So based around the ITIL 22 process functionality, we look to describe how each of those processes, who will own those, who will be a party to them, who has responsibility for delivering them, and that then helps us to identify those service interfaces between your service organization, your SIAM, your TAL model, or whatever, so however you're orchestrating your service, and the supplier. We've got some examples of a few from service continuity on the right hand side. So just to give you an idea here of some example of some smart requirements that should that align to that. But we use the most important part is that for a major part of the service requirements, we use that ITIL framework um, as a common vocabulary, as a common taxonomy that we can use between what the supplier is describing and what he's willing to do, what he's ascertaining his catalog service provides, and what you as a service organization need to support. Now, typically for departments who are new to cloud procurement and are new to cloud services, this often doesn't fit typically well, neatly into their existing organization. So again, old traditional in-source outsource model, you have a large, you have a number of suppliers that you manage through, possibly through a tower model, um, but often you will offload those obligations and those service responsibilities to your suppliers. Now, with G-Cloud, you can do that to an extent, but typically there will be gaps between what you expect and need and what the supplier expects to need. G-Cloud gives the ability for us to fill that with T&M. However, that can often be a very expensive and a bit of a shock, unbudgeted and unnecessarily identified costs. And what we try to do through this model here is try and unpick that and get to some idea of where the responsibilities lie, what those costs are, what the amount of time obligation is, so they can give you a realistic view of what the true cost of that service will be. Security, we have a similar framework. The CSG, or the National Cybersecurity Centre, now has, as they're now called, it has 14 cloud principles, and we look to, and actually G Cloud has driven all the suppliers to articulate their service lines very clearly in those terms. We so from the requirement set, we make sure that we've got very good coverage of those 14 security principles. They usually map out to, in G-Cloud terms, about 40 or so G-Cloud security attributes, and typically we will make sure there's at least one requirement that covers each one of those to make it clear. The principles obviously covered at a high level. They don't give the detail, and it's actually the detail that you need to actually be able to down select. So we've got some examples here again on the right. There's a couple of quite high level statements in the principles that say you obviously the data needs to be secured and located appropriately. And here we've got an example of where a client actually would like the data to be managed in the UK, but it must be stored and managed inside the EU. Again, typically is a very good example of how um, to give you the most flexible selection and not to pigeonhole into a very small number or even possibly the wrong answers, where we can use requirements to help articulate not only the outcomes we're trying to achieve, but also that down select criteria keyword approach. So I'm just going to conclude that here for today for the first of the seminars, and just get you an overview of where we've got to. Typically, non-functionals are not often clear or sufficient inside the G-Cloud catalog. What does that mean? Well, service requirements typically are articulated in different terminology, though ITIL is often the underlying framework. It may often be unclear who is performing some of those key functions. Onboarding, service assurance, operational security, all those expensive man-time, day-to-day activities that are expected as part of a secure government service. Typically, we found that they are either, if they are costed, they are usually costed insufficiently, or they are made some very bold, suppliers make some very bold assumptions, or that worst case, they just is a different terminology and a different expectations. And what does that mean? Well, service comes on board, you'll find that everything else is T&M, and that can make them very, very expensive. You may have bought a service that is only going to cost you a few £100s a month, but actually you need to pay for 5-6 man days a month to give you the service levels you need. So getting that understood is very, very important. Typically, it's very unlikely that you'll get services that are 100% aligned to your in-house requirements. So what does that mean? Well, that's where the requirements are quite useful because they can identify and help communicate between stakeholders, but they also will often act as a useful tool to challenge and confirm what are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve, and what are those must-have requirements against what are the nice and desirables. And often again, we hear the term gold-plated. We try and take those back to what is suitable and good enough, given that this is a package selection of a short-term requirement that can often be changed at relatively short notice. And if you're going through a GDS, digital by design process, where you're doing a discovery, an alpha, and a beta, then that discovery alpha phase at the beginning enables you to get the package on board. You can try it out. It works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't stop you actually cancelling it and starting again or looking for something else. So it's about making them good enough. There is a lot of difference in the quality of service descriptions, different terminology, and that makes it hard. And that's where this process tries to help break that down and make it clear by using some key criteria and some key keywords. That enables you to use the descriptions as they exist to simplify and reduce your list to a set of common outcomes and common goals, and describe them in terminology that business stakeholders will understand, as well as the procurement team. And as I say, there's often holes in the service descriptions and in the costs, and getting that process to clearly identify those can give you the confidence that actually you've got a good handle on what the a high degree of accuracy in your service costs, in your true service costs. Often we will find high level and slightly overarching glib statements made around what is included and what is not. And typically there will be a catch-all phrase like call for more details. Well, unfortunately, as soon as a service description takes you down that route, the only assumption you can make is that it's T&M. Because obviously if it's not priced in the catalogue, then you can't buy it from the catalogue. So next time we're going to look at more at how we take our requirements into a set of key criteria and a set of functional needs. And that helps us with that evaluation process that we identified early on, and how we can take that templated approach and simplify and repeat time and time again. So we're going to stop that at that point for today. And just to conclude a little bit, obviously, about us, if you don't know anything, we're a specialist in cloud and software services that help clients, both client and supplier side, providing secure services to central government and law enforcement across a number of the major industries. And we've been involved in G-Cloud since the early days, and have provided teams and capabilities to a number of departments to help them through some of their spending review commitments and transformation obligations. So lots of detail there for you to pick up, and as I say, it's all on the website if you want. Um, at that point, I'm going to bring it to a close and just thank you for your time, and we look forward to for you joining us the next time for the second part in this small series.